The doors flew open, and in walked a man with the Delta Force patch and a stare that froze the room. He didn't yell. He didn't ask twice. Just 4 words. "Where is my daughter?" What followed silenced the entire school. But first, let's go back to the beginning. 12-year-old Amira Brooks had never seen the inside of the principal's office before, only passed it on her way to advanced math, occasionally glancing through the narrow glass as a blur of students and staff filtered in and out. She never imagined she'd be the one sitting stiffly on that cold vinyl bench, wrists cuffed behind her back, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She hadn't spoken since they dragged her out of class, not when the security guard yanked her backpack from her shoulder in front of her classmates, not when Officer Lasky pressed her up against the lockers and told her to spread your feet, not even when they told her she was being detained for theft. Because there's a moment, right between disbelief and fear, where words stop working. And Amira was stuck there. She'd only stood near the iPad. It wasn't hers. It was on the desk after PE. But by the time someone whispered, by the time someone else pointed, by the time the teacher called the front office, Amira was already guilty in their eyes. That was all it took. A glance, a rumor, a name on a list. Now, in this cramped, overheated room, lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes that gave everything a sickly yellow hue, she sat silently, knees drawn in close, fingers clenched and aching against metal cuffs. Across from her, Officer Hensley filled out paperwork with the kind of bored efficiency that only comes from routine. Not a glance in her direction. Not a second thought. Just another ticked box on another form. "You kids think you can get away with anything," he muttered without looking up, the pen dragging a hard, final line across the page. Amira didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She wasn't loud, she wasn't rude. She always turned in her homework early. She liked solving equations more than talking at lunch, and she'd never, ever, so much as been late to class. Still, here she was, labeled, judged, packaged in a system that didn't need evidence, just a face it expected to blame. When she finally found the strength to lift her eyes, they stung from holding back tears. Her voice was small, nearly swallowed by the thrum of the building's old ventilation system. "Can I call my dad?" That was all she said. Not a protest, not a plea, just one request. But the moment the words left her lips, the officers exchanged a look and burst out laughing, and something in Amira's chest, the last bit of safety, of childhood, of belief that grown-ups are supposed to protect you, cracked. Not broken, but cracked enough to know this day would never leave her. Not ever. Detective Carl Hensley didn't look at Amira Brooks as a child. He saw her as a problem to be processed, a silhouette already shaped by his assumptions. 22 years on the force had calcified whatever empathy he might have once had. His eyes no longer scanned for truth. They scanned for threats. And to him, Amira, even in her trembling silence, even in her oversized backpack and braided hair, was exactly that. "You think your dad's gonna save you, little girl?" he said, the venom in his voice barely restrained. Then came the pause. A deliberate, simmering pause. "Where's your mom? You people never got your dads around anyway." Amira's head stayed low, but her jaw tightened. She said nothing. Not because she was indifferent, but because she knew deep down that nothing she said would change what they already believed. Her silence was not agreement. It was a defense. Officer Lasky let out a dry, nasal chuckle and shifted his weight, pressing his shoulder into the doorframe. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His smirk was louder than words. His crossed arms said, "We've done this before, and you're not special." Outside the door, someone knocked. Soft, hesitant. Ms. Jansen, the school counselor, peeked in with her clipboard clutched to her chest. Her eyes darted to Amira and then back to the officers. "Maybe we should wait for—" "Back off, ma'am," Hensley snapped without turning. "We know how to handle troublemakers." That word, troublemakers, hung in the air like a stain, as if Amira's mere presence in that room confirmed it, as if her skin, her silence, her fear, were all forms of guilt. They made her sit on a metal bench by the radiator, a spot so cramped her knees touched the wall. Her wrists were still cuffed behind her back, arms beginning to ache. Lasky tossed her backpack onto the floor like garbage, unzipped it roughly, and began dumping the contents one item at a time. Pencil case, algebra textbook, a small zippered pouch with her inhaler, a notebook with doodles along the margins, all scattered across the floor, ignored, trampled. No one asked her name. No one checked the security feed. No one noticed her hands trembling as she sat still, afraid that moving might make it worse. The law, in that moment, wasn't about truth. It was about control, about who got to ask the questions, and who had no right to speak. The silence in that office wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of something rotting, of dignity peeled back by men who had long since forgotten the difference between justice and power. The phone rang once, then again. The front office secretary, Janine Rudd, reached for the receiver with the mechanical rhythm of someone used to noise. Her day had been filled with incident reports, late passes, and a faulty copier. But this call didn't sound like the others. "Yes, we're handling it. Wait. Colonel who?" Her posture straightened before the name even fully registered. Her eyes widened. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." She didn't hang up. She placed the phone down, gently, as if the air itself had changed. It had. 5 minutes passed. No announcements, no movements. Only the quiet, aching tension of a school office that suddenly realized it had made a very serious mistake. And then, boom, boom. Bootsteps. Heavy. Exact. Purposeful. The sound didn't echo. It commanded. The kind of sound that makes everyone stop mid-sentence, mid-breath. The kind of sound that doesn't ask permission. The glass doors swung open. Colonel David Brooks walked in not like a man who came to speak, but like one who had already decided the outcome. His jacket bore no medals, just a single unmistakable Delta Force patch above the left breast. That emblem carried more weight than any name tag or badge. His eyes, sharp and cold, scanned the office like a battlefield, every corner measured, every presence catalogued. "I'm looking for my daughter." Principal Donovan Hayes, mid-gesture with a student folder, nearly dropped it. "Colonel, I wasn't informed you were... I wasn't asking for your awareness," Brooks said flatly. "I was asking for my daughter." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need directions. The kind of man who knows how to clear rooms with a glance never asks twice. He walked straight past the frozen staff, past the counselor, past the assistant principal fumbling with her lanyard, and stopped at the room with the closed door. Inside sat Amira, small, still cuffed, her cheeks flushed from silent humiliation. She looked up, her breath caught. Then she stood. Not out of fear, but instinct. His presence didn't overwhelm her. It anchored her. Brooks placed a hand on her shoulder, not for comfort, but for claim. A silent, unshakable statement. "She is mine." He turned to the officers. "You two, detain my child without evidence, without due process, and deny her a phone call?" Lasky opened his mouth. "She was a suspect." "Based on what?" Brooks snapped, the edge in his voice slicing through the room. "A rumor? Her skin?" No one answered, because nothing could be said that wouldn't make it worse, and everyone in that room for the first time that day understood they weren't in control anymore. The colonel had arrived, and justice had changed hands. Colonel David Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was forged not in rank, but in what it had taken to earn it. Years of field command, black ops buried under code names, and the kind of experience that taught him to speak only when words were meant to end things. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Officer Lasky's hand instinctively twitched toward his belt. "Relax," Brooks said without looking at him. "If I wanted a weapon, we'd be having a different conversation." What emerged instead was a hard black leather badge case. He flipped it open, revealing a Federal Operations ID with Delta Force insignia on one side, and clearance seals that most civilians, and even most law enforcement, would never see in their lifetime. Top-level Pentagon authorization, no commentary, no questions. Brooks took a breath so calm, so steady, it felt rehearsed. "I suggest," he said, gaze unmoving, "you both sit down, because I just got off the phone with your chief, and the district attorney." Lasky's eyes darted to Hensley. Hensley tried to steady himself, his jaw tightening to suppress whatever instinct told him to talk back. But it was too late for saving face. His legs moved before he gave them permission. He sat. Lasky followed, slower but not slower enough to hide the sudden sweat along his temple. In the span of 10 minutes, the atmosphere shifted from quiet intimidation to procedural collapse. 2 uniformed internal affairs officers arrived, neutral expressions, body cams already on. They didn't ask questions. They handed over clipboards, spoke quietly, and escorted both men from the building. Hensley didn't speak. Lasky mumbled something about miscommunication and routine caution, as if those words could erase what had just happened. They passed Amira without meeting her eyes. Her name was cleared. Officially. Publicly. The school issued an apology, both verbal and written, signed by the superintendent. It arrived in a branded envelope the next day. But for Colonel Brooks, apologies were cosmetic. He filed a formal complaint the same evening. By morning, local reporters were circling, and once body cam footage was released under pressure from activists and legal aid groups, the story went national. The footage didn't need editing. It showed exactly what happened, what they said, how they said it. The public outcry came fast. 2 officers suspended pending investigation. A school board forced into emergency session. The superintendent facing calls to resign. And in the center of it all stood a father who hadn't raised his voice once. Because when your presence is the reckoning, silence becomes the sharpest blade of all.